What happened when you stopped hiding your pregnancy from your family? I was sitting at Sunday dinner when my sister cornered me. You can't announce your pregnancy today, she said, grabbing my arm. I'm announcing mine next week. This is my year. I stared at her. What? I'm already 3 months along. She crossed her arms. I've been trying for 2 years. You got pregnant without even planning. You need to wait until after my baby shower. My parents walked in. What's going on? My sister's eyes welled up. She wants to announce today even though she knows I've been struggling. Mom turned to me. Just wait a few more weeks. What's the harm? Dad nodded. Be considerate of your sister's journey. I felt my throat tighten. But this is my first baby too. Exactly, my sister said. You'll have other chances. I might not. Don't steal my thunder. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She started texting me daily reminders. Remember our agreement. No social media. No telling extended family. She banned me from family events. You're showing. Skip cousin Maria's wedding. I had to lie when friends asked why I wasn't drinking. Just on antibiotics, I'd say, hating every word. She scheduled her announcement for my birthday week. I need the spotlight right now, she said. My parents backed her up. She's fragile. Be the bigger person. Then she moved the goalpost. Actually, wait until after my gender reveal. Then again. After my shower. Your pregnancy might trigger my anxiety and affect my baby. I tried to comply. Hid morning sickness at work. Running to the bathroom between meetings. Missed my best friend's bachelorette party because I couldn't explain why I couldn't drink champagne. Wore baggy sweaters in August, sweating through family gatherings. 3 weeks passed. Now 15 weeks, my belly was obvious. You're making it too obvious, my sister complained. Try harder. My husband was furious. This is our baby. Why are we hiding? I had to skip the prenatal yoga class where her friends went. Declined a work promotion that required travel because I couldn't disclose my pregnancy to HR. She posted constantly about her fertility journey while I stayed silent. After she announced, she still demanded I wait. 2 more weeks, after my baby shower. My birthday arrived. Extended family gathered at my parents' house. My sister pulled me aside. Remember, not today. 2 more weeks won't kill you. Something snapped. During dessert, I stood up, tapping my glass. I have an announcement. The room quieted. I'm 4 months pregnant. I pulled out the ultrasound photos I'd been carrying for weeks. We've been waiting to share our joy. My sister's face went red. You promised. She stood up, shaking. You're so selfish. This was supposed to be my time. It's my birthday, I said calmly. And my pregnancy. She stormed out. My parents looked horrified. How could you do this? Mom asked. She specifically asked you to wait. Later, my sister's husband pulled me aside on the porch. His face was gray. I need to tell you something. She's not actually pregnant. My stomach dropped. What? She had another miscarriage 8 weeks ago. Couldn't face telling people. She was going to fake it through the shower, then claim she lost it from stress. He rubbed his face. She's done this before. With your cousins. Twice. And Mom knows? Both your parents know. They think they're protecting her. I felt sick. She was using my pregnancy as cover? He nodded. If you announced and she lost hers after, she'd blame you. 3 weeks later, at her baby shower, my sister completely lost it when someone asked about my pregnancy. She threw the cake at the wall, screaming that I'd ruined everything. Started breaking gifts, throwing chairs. Someone called 911. The police found her with a fake pregnancy belly that fell off during the struggle. On the way to the car, she screamed, "You think this is over? You don't even know about the pills in the punch bowl." 2 officers moved fast toward the punch bowl table, while another started herding guests away from the food area. One officer grabbed my sister's arm to keep her from running while his partner spoke into his radio. Paramedics pushed through the front door with their equipment bags and headed straight for the beverage table. Guests started talking all at once, some crying, others pulling out their phones. An officer raised his voice over the noise and told everyone to stay put, that they needed statements from anyone who drank the punch. My aunt sat down hard on a folding chair, her hand over her mouth. 3 people rushed to the bathroom looking pale. The female officer who seemed to be in charge walked over to me and my husband. She pulled out a notebook and asked us to explain what happened leading up to tonight. My husband squeezed my hand as I started talking, my voice shaking. I told her about the 3 months of forced secrecy, the daily text messages, being banned from family events, having to hide my pregnancy at work and with friends. I explained how my sister announced her pregnancy, but it turned out to be fake, how she was going to blame me for a fake miscarriage. The officer's pen stopped moving and she looked up at me with a different expression, not just taking notes anymore but actually concerned. She asked if my parents knew about the fake pregnancy, and I nodded, feeling sick saying it out loud. My husband added that my sister had been escalating for weeks, becoming more controlling and unstable. The officer asked how far along I was, and I told her almost 16 weeks, pulling my sweater tight over my belly. She made a note and asked if I felt safe, if there had been other threats. Before I could answer, Ricardo walked up to us, his face gray and tired-looking. He told the officer he was the sister's husband, and he needed to add something to my statement. The officer turned to a fresh page while Ricardo pulled out his phone. He said he tried to warn me earlier tonight but felt trapped by family pressure and his wife's manipulation. He scrolled through his messages and showed the officer text between him and my sister from 2 weeks ago. The texts talked about timing, about waiting until after my announcement to claim she lost the baby from stress. One message said clearly that I would be blamed for causing it. The officer took photos of the screen with her own phone and asked Ricardo to forward the messages to her email. He did it right there, his hands shaking as he typed. Another officer joined us and asked Ricardo about the punch threat, whether his wife had access to any medications or substances. Ricardo said she had anxiety medication, but he didn't think she actually did anything to the punch, that she was just trying to scare people and get attention. Over by the beverage table, a paramedic in blue gloves dipped a test strip into the punch bowl and waited. He shook his head and spoke to his partner, who wrote something on a clipboard. They poured punch into small sample containers anyway, sealing and labeling each one. The lead paramedic announced that the initial test showed nothing dangerous, but they were taking samples for the lab, and anyone who drank from the bowl should get checked out as a safety measure. My cousin and her husband went over to the paramedics, and I saw them getting their blood pressure taken. My mom pushed through the crowd toward the officers, my dad right behind her. Mom's makeup was running down her face and she grabbed the female officer's arm. She said they needed to take their daughter home, that she would get her help privately, that this was just a mental health crisis that didn't need police involvement. The officer gently removed my mom's hand from her arm and explained that wasn't possible. She said my sister had a violent outburst in front of multiple witnesses, destroyed property, made threats about poisoning people, and showed signs of a serious mental health episode. The officer told my parents that my sister was placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hold for evaluation at the hospital. My mom started crying harder, begging them to please just let her take her daughter home. Dad put his arm around Mom but looked at the officer and asked if there was really no other option. The officer said this was for everyone's safety, including my sister's safety, and that the hospital would do a full evaluation. Mom turned to me then, her eyes red and angry. She said this was my fault, that if I had just waited like my sister asked, none of this would have happened. My husband stepped between us and told my mom to back off, that I didn't cause any of this. Dad pulled Mom away before the officer had to intervene. 2 officers brought my sister out from wherever they had taken her, one on each side holding her arms. She was still screaming, her voice raw and broken. She yelled that I ruined her life, that I stole her moment, that everyone would have been happy if I had just stayed quiet. The fake pregnancy belly was gone now, and her dress hung loose around her middle. Paramedics walked beside them with a gurney ready. My sister saw me watching and screamed louder, calling me selfish and cruel. Part of me felt guilty despite everything, like maybe I really had pushed her too far. My husband leaned close to my ear and said, I didn't cause this, that I just stopped hiding it. He said she did this to herself with months of manipulation and lies. They got my sister onto the gurney and strapped her down because she kept trying to sit up. She turned her head toward me one last time before they loaded her into the ambulance. The doors closed and the ambulance pulled away without sirens, just lights flashing red and blue across the yard. Guests started leaving quickly after that, nobody making eye contact or saying goodbye. We gave the officer our contact information, and she said someone might follow up in a few days. My husband guided me to our car with his hand on my lower back. We got in and he started driving, neither of us saying anything for the first 10 minutes. My hands wouldn't stop shaking in my lap no matter how hard I pressed them together. I kept thinking about how close I came to staying silent forever, to letting her control my whole pregnancy. My husband reached over and held my hand without taking his eyes off the road. When we got home, I went straight to bed but couldn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling replaying everything. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before 7. Text after text, call after call, voicemails piling up. I scrolled through them with my coffee getting cold on the counter. Some family members were supportive, saying they always knew something was off about my sister's behavior. Others were mad at me for causing a scene at what was supposed to be a celebration. My dad's sister sent a long message about how I should have been more understanding of my sister's fertility struggles. Cousin Maria, whose wedding I had to skip, sent a short text saying she wished I had told her the truth back then. A few people just seemed confused, asking what was real and what wasn't, whether my sister was actually ever pregnant. I didn't respond to any of them, just let the messages pile up. Around noon, Ricardo called and asked if he could come over to talk. He said he needed to tell me everything about the pattern of behavior I didn't know about. I told him yes and gave him our address. He showed up an hour later looking like he hadn't slept, his shirt wrinkled and his eyes tired. We sat at the kitchen table and my husband made coffee while Ricardo rubbed his face with both hands. He started talking slowly, like he was trying to figure out how to explain something complicated. He said my sister had done this before, twice, with our cousins. Both times she announced a fake pregnancy right after they announced real ones. Both times she demanded they stay quiet about their pregnancies so she could have her moment. He said our parents helped cover it up both times by pressuring the cousins to be understanding of her fertility struggles. When the cousins finally announced anyway, my sister claimed she had miscarriages and blamed them for the stress. Our parents backed her up, made the cousins feel guilty, kept the whole family walking on eggshells around her. Ricardo said he didn't know about the first time until after he married her, and he thought the second time would be the last. He kept hoping she would get real help, that the pattern would stop. But then I got pregnant and he watched it all start again. The manipulation and control and lies. I sat there feeling sick to my stomach as the truth sank in. This wasn't just about me and my pregnancy. My sister had done this twice before, used other people's real pregnancies as cover for her fake ones, blamed them when everything fell apart. Our parents knew and helped her do it. Ricardo looked exhausted as he explained how he stayed all these years hoping she would finally get real help. He said he kept thinking the next time would be different, that she would hit bottom and accept treatment. But watching it happen again with me made him see the pattern would never stop on its own. She needed serious help, the kind that came with real consequences, not just family members tiptoeing around her feelings. He apologized for not warning me sooner, said he felt trapped between loyalty to his wife and knowing what she was doing was wrong. After Ricardo left, my husband and I sat on the couch not saying much. He held my hand, and we both stared at the wall trying to process everything. Finally, he said we needed to talk to a lawyer about protecting ourselves and our baby. I agreed right away. We couldn't control what my sister did or how my parents reacted, but we could control what access they had to our lives going forward. He pulled out his phone and started searching for family law attorneys who dealt with harassment and restraining orders. I felt weird about it, like we were being too extreme. But then I remembered the fake belly falling off and my sister screaming about poison. My husband found 3 lawyers with good reviews and sent inquiry emails to all of them. We decided to meet with whoever responded first and seemed like a good fit. The next morning, I woke up with my stomach in knots. I kept thinking about the baby and whether all this stress was hurting them. My husband was already up making coffee, and he asked if I was okay. I told him I wanted to call my doctor and make sure everything was fine with the pregnancy. He said that was a good idea and handed me my phone. I dialed the OB office and explained to the nurse what happened, leaving out some of the crazier details but making it clear there was a lot of family stress and emotional upset. She didn't ask too many questions, just said she would check with the doctor and call me back. 20 minutes later, she called and scheduled me for that afternoon at 2:30. She said they would do a quick check to make sure the baby was doing okay, and monitor my blood pressure since stress can affect it. I thanked her and spent the rest of the morning trying to distract myself with laundry and dishes. At the appointment, the nurse took me back and wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. The machine beeped and she frowned a little at the numbers but didn't say anything. Then she took me to the exam room where my doctor came in a few minutes later. She asked me to explain what was going on, and I gave her the short version about my sister's fake pregnancy, the public meltdown, and the police getting involved. My doctor nodded and said she had seen similar family situations before, and they could definitely affect pregnancy health. She did an ultrasound and we heard the baby's heartbeat right away, strong and steady. I started crying with relief. She measured everything and said the baby looked perfect, growing right on schedule. But then she showed me my blood pressure numbers and said they were higher than she liked. Not dangerous yet, but elevated enough to worry about. She wrote everything down in my chart and said I needed to find ways to manage my stress. She recommended therapy, deep breathing, prenatal yoga if I felt up to it, and avoiding the people causing me stress as much as possible. She also said to come back in 2 weeks instead of 4, so she could keep monitoring my blood pressure. I left the office feeling better about the baby, but worried about my own health. That evening, my phone rang with my dad's number. I almost didn't answer, but my husband said I should hear what they had to say. Dad's voice sounded tight and formal when I picked up. He said we needed to have a family meeting to work this out, that we couldn't just leave things like this. I took a breath and told him I needed space right now and wouldn't meet without a neutral third party present, like a therapist or mediator. He went quiet for a second, then said that seemed extreme. I said what happened at the baby shower was extreme and I needed to protect myself and my baby. He sounded hurt but said he would accept that. Then Mom got on the phone and started crying about how I was tearing the family apart. She said my sister needed us right now and I was abandoning her when she was at her lowest point. I felt my blood pressure rising and told Mom I had to go. She kept talking, but I ended the call. My hands shook as I set the phone down. Over the next few days, I went through my social media and started blocking people. First, I blocked my sister on everything. Then I blocked the family members who had sent me nasty messages calling me selfish or saying I should have just waited. My husband sat next to me with a notebook, and we made a timeline of everything that happened, starting from that first Sunday dinner when my sister told me not to announce. We wrote down dates and times as best we could remember. We took screenshots of all her text messages telling me to stay quiet, to skip events, to wait longer. My husband found the messages between him and me where I talked about how stressed I was from hiding the pregnancy. We organized everything into a folder on the computer with dates and labels. It took hours, but by the end we had a clear record of months of manipulation and control. My husband also helped me write down the names of people who saw what happened at the baby shower, in case we needed witness statements later. It felt strange to be documenting my own family like this, but the lawyer emails had mentioned we would need evidence. My best friend called on the 3rd day. She said she heard what happened from someone who was at the baby shower. She apologized for not pushing harder when I made excuses about not drinking at her events or when I seemed stressed at gatherings. She said she suspected something was wrong but didn't want to pry into my business. I told her it wasn't her fault, that I had gotten really good at hiding things because my sister demanded it, She asked if I needed anything, and I said just having someone who believed me and wasn't taking sides meant everything. We talked for almost an hour, and I felt lighter afterward, like at least one person in my life understood what I went through. Work got complicated when I finally went to HR to disclose my pregnancy officially. I had to explain why I was already 4 months along and hadn't said anything sooner, why I turned down the promotion that required travel. The HR woman listened with a concerned expression and said she understood family situations could be difficult. But then she mentioned that the promotion I declined had already been given to someone else. They couldn't hold the position open when I said I wasn't interested. I felt my stomach drop. That promotion meant more money and better hours, and I had given it up to keep my sister's secret. The HR woman was nice about it and said she would note my pregnancy in the system and work with my manager on accommodations. But I left her office feeling angry at myself for sacrificing so much. The next afternoon, the hospital called. A social worker said my sister was released from the 72-hour hold. They had evaluated her and given her referrals for outpatient treatment and therapy. The social worker said they strongly encouraged her to follow up with the mental health resources, but couldn't force her to go. She asked if I felt safe and if I wanted information about restraining orders. I said I was already looking into that. She wished me luck and said to call if I needed anything else. I sat there after the call ended feeling strange. Part of me hoped my sister would get help. Part of me didn't believe she would actually go to therapy. That night, my brother-in-law sent a text. He said my sister was staying at our parents' house and refusing to admit she did anything wrong. She kept saying everyone overreacted, and that I was the real problem for announcing my pregnancy when she asked me not to. He said he was moving to a friend's place temporarily because he couldn't be around the denial anymore. He needed space to figure out what he wanted to do about the marriage. I texted back that I understood and that he should take care of himself. He sent back a simple thanks. I showed the text to my husband and he shook his head. We both knew this was just the beginning of a much longer process. The next morning, I called 3 different therapists before finding one who specialized in family dynamics and could see me that week. Her office was in a small building near the hospital, and when I walked in on Thursday afternoon, she introduced herself and led me to a room with 2 chairs and a box of tissues on the table. I told her everything, starting from that first Sunday dinner and going through the baby shower explosion and the psychiatric hold. She listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally, and when I finished, she looked at me with this expression that made me feel like she understood. She said what my parents did was called enabling, and that it was its own form of harm even if they thought they were helping. She explained that by protecting my sister from consequences, they taught her that manipulation worked, and that other people's needs didn't matter. I asked if I was wrong to create distance from my parents, and she said protecting my child meant setting limits with anyone who couldn't respect boundaries, even family. We talked for almost an hour, and she gave me homework to write down specific examples of times my family put my sister's feelings above my safety or well-being. I left feeling lighter but also sad, like I was grieving the family I thought I had. The next session she taught me words I'd never heard before, but that fit my family perfectly. Gaslighting was when they made me doubt my own reality, like when my parents acted like I was overreacting to reasonable concerns. Triangulation was when my sister would complain to my parents instead of talking to me directly, getting them to pressure me on her behalf. Enmeshment meant we were all too tangled up in each other's business, with no healthy separation between people. Having language for these patterns made me feel less crazy about everything that happened. I wasn't imagining problems or being too sensitive. These were real things that therapists studied and treated. She said my family had been operating this way for so long that they probably didn't even realize how unhealthy it was. I asked how to fix it, and she said I couldn't fix them, only set boundaries to protect myself and my baby. That same week, my dad called my cell phone on a Wednesday evening. My mom wasn't with him, which was unusual since they usually presented a united front. He sounded tired and said he wanted to talk without her listening. He admitted that he'd been thinking about what happened at the baby shower and going back through years of similar situations. He said he was starting to see how they'd made excuses for my sister's behavior over and over, always asking everyone else to be understanding instead of holding her accountable. His voice cracked when he talked about the cousins and how they'd pressured them the same way they pressured me. He said he didn't know it was a pattern until now, and he felt terrible about it. But then he said he didn't know how to fix things without abandoning my sister when she clearly needed help. I could hear the conflict in his voice, like he was torn between 2 daughters and didn't know how to support both. I took a breath and told him that getting my sister real help wasn't abandoning her. I said that continuing to make excuses and protect her from consequences was actually harming her, because it meant she never had to face reality or change. I explained that real love sometimes meant letting people experience the results of their choices, even when it was hard to watch. He was quiet for a long time, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, he said he would think about what I said, and that he was sorry for everything. We hung up, and I sat there hoping he really would think about it, and not just go back to doing what my mom wanted. My sister started calling and leaving voicemails after she got out of the hospital. I didn't answer any of them, but I listened to each one and saved them all in a folder on my phone. The messages would start with her crying and apologizing, saying she knew she messed up and that she wanted to make things right. Then halfway through the same message, her tone would shift and she'd get angry, accusing me of being selfish and ruining her life by announcing my pregnancy. She never took real responsibility, never acknowledged the months of manipulation or the fake pregnancy or the lies. It was always partly my fault somehow, like if I had just waited longer or been more understanding, none of this would have happened. I showed the messages to my therapist, and she said this was typical of someone who wasn't ready to accept accountability. She suggested I keep saving them as documentation, but not respond, since engaging would just give my sister what she wanted, which was my attention and reaction. The lawyer I met with on Friday looked over all the documentation I brought. The timeline, the text messages, the voicemails, the police report from the baby shower. She spread everything out on her desk and read through it carefully, making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she said I had grounds to file for a restraining order based on the threatening behavior and the pattern of harassment over several months. I told her it felt extreme, like I was overreacting by getting the legal system involved. She looked at me seriously and said my sister's behavior had been getting worse, not better, and that the punch poisoning threat showed an escalation that shouldn't be ignored. She explained that restraining orders weren't about punishment, they were about safety and clear boundaries. She said we could file the paperwork next week if I decided to move forward, and that the temporary order would go into effect immediately while we waited for a hearing. I said I needed to talk to my husband first, and she understood. That weekend, my husband and I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and drafted a written statement of our boundaries. We wrote down exactly what we needed from my parents if they wanted to be part of our lives and meet their grandchild. No more keeping secrets or hiding things to protect my sister. No more triangulation where they passed messages back and forth instead of people talking directly. No contact with my sister until she completed real treatment and made genuine amends that showed she understood what she did wrong. We practiced saying no to unreasonable requests, taking turns playing the parent who would push back or make excuses. It felt silly at first, but my husband said we needed to be ready because my parents would test the boundaries as soon as we set them. We agreed that if they violated the agreement, we would reduce contact further, maybe down to just phone calls or supervised visits only. On Sunday, I sat down and wrote an email to my extended family. I kept it brief and factual, explaining that there had been a situation at my sister's baby shower involving a mental health crisis and police intervention. I said that my sister had not actually been pregnant and had been struggling with some serious issues that our family was working to address. I asked everyone to respect my privacy and not share details on social media or gossip about what happened. I said I appreciated their support during my pregnancy and looked forward to introducing them to the baby when things settled down. I hit send and watched the responses come in over the next few hours. Most people were supportive and kind, saying they had no idea things were that bad and offering to help however they could. A few relatives sent messages telling me I should forgive and move on. That family was family, and I needed to be the bigger person. I didn't respond to those messages, just archived them and moved on. Tuesday afternoon, Ricardo sent me a text saying he was officially moving out and had filed paperwork for legal separation. He said he couldn't stay in a marriage where his wife refused to see reality or get genuine help. He'd tried for years to support her through the fertility struggles and the mental health issues, but the fake pregnancy and baby shower disaster was the final breaking point. He said he felt sad about it, but also relieved, like he could finally breathe again without walking on eggshells. I texted back that I understood his decision completely and didn't blame him at all. I said I hoped he would take care of himself and that he deserved to be happy. He sent back a simple thank you with a heart emoji. My next prenatal appointment was on Thursday morning, and I brought copies of all the documentation with me. I told my doctor about the restraining order plans and asked if there was anything we needed to do to protect my privacy at the hospital when I went into labor. She didn't seem surprised at all and said this happened more often than people realized. She made a note in my file about security concerns and said the hospital had protocols to prevent unauthorized visitors from accessing patient information or getting into labor and delivery rooms. She said when I came in to give birth, I should tell the intake staff right away that I had security concerns, and they would put a code on my chart that would alert all staff. She also said I could provide a list of approved visitors, and anyone not on that list would be turned away no matter what they claimed. I felt better knowing there was a plan in place, even though I hated that it was necessary. I felt better knowing there was a plan in place, even though I hated that it was necessary. A week later, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was my therapist's office manager asking if I'd be willing to participate in a family session. My parents had reached out requesting mediation and wanted to know if I'd consider one meeting with clear ground rules. My sister wouldn't attend. I told her I needed to think about it and hung up. That night, my husband and I sat on the couch discussing whether this was a good idea or just another way for my parents to manipulate me into backing down. He reminded me that we'd set boundaries for a reason, and that any meeting needed to respect those boundaries completely. We agreed that if we did this, we'd walk out the second anyone started making excuses or trying to gaslight me about what happened. I called the therapist's office the next morning and said yes to one session. We scheduled it for the following Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. My therapist would be there to keep things on track and make sure the conversation stayed productive instead of turning into another round of blame and deflection. I spent the days leading up to the meeting feeling anxious and preparing myself for disappointment. My husband took the afternoon off work to come with me for moral support. We drove to the therapist's office in silence, both of us tense about what might happen. The waiting room felt too small when we walked in and saw my parents already sitting there. My dad stood up when he saw me but didn't try to hug me. My mom's eyes were red like she'd been crying. We all followed the therapist into her office and sat down in a circle of chairs. The therapist started by reviewing the ground rules. Everyone would get a chance to speak without interruption. No name-calling or personal attacks. If anyone felt unsafe or disrespected, they could leave at any time. My parents both nodded their agreement. The therapist asked me to start by explaining how I felt about everything that had happened. I took a deep breath and began talking about the months of forced secrecy, the lies I had to tell, the opportunities I missed because I couldn't be honest about my pregnancy. My voice stayed calm, but my hands were shaking. I talked about finding out my sister wasn't actually pregnant and realizing my parents knew the whole time. I explained how betrayed I felt that they chose to protect her manipulation instead of supporting my real pregnancy. My mom started to interrupt, but the therapist held up her hand. When I finished, there was a long silence. My dad's face looked gray and he was staring at his hands. My mom was crying quietly into a tissue. The therapist asked them what they heard me say. My dad spoke first, his voice rough. He said he never realized how much pressure they'd put on me or how wrong it was to ask me to hide something so important. He said they were so focused on protecting my sister from another breakdown that they didn't see how they were hurting me. His eyes filled with tears, and he looked directly at me for the first time. He apologized for making me feel like my pregnancy didn't matter as much as my sister's feelings. My mom struggled more with taking responsibility. She kept trying to explain their reasoning and justify their choices. The therapist gently redirected her several times, asking her to focus on how her actions affected me, rather than defending why she did them. Eventually, my mom admitted that she knew it was wrong but felt trapped between her two daughters. She said she was scared of what my sister might do if they didn't support her story. I told them that I understood they were scared, but that enabling my sister's behavior wasn't actually helping her. It was just teaching her that she could manipulate people without consequences. My husband spoke up then, saying that we needed to know this wouldn't happen again. We needed clear boundaries and agreements about how our family would function going forward. The therapist suggested we work on creating a written agreement that everyone could sign. Over the next hour, we drafted a document outlining specific expectations. My parents would attend a support group for families dealing with mental health issues. They would stop making excuses for my sister's behavior to extended family, or trying to minimize what happened. They would respect our boundaries about contact and information sharing. If my sister tried to use them as messengers or manipulate them into pressuring us, they would shut it down immediately. Most importantly, they would not share any information about me, my pregnancy, or my baby with my sister, without my explicit permission. We all signed the document and the therapist made copies for everyone. She reminded my parents that rebuilding trust takes time and consistent action. One good conversation didn't erase months of hurt. My dad nodded seriously and said he understood. My mom looked uncomfortable but agreed. As we left the office, my dad asked if he could hug me. I hesitated but then let him. It felt awkward and sad, but also like maybe a tiny first step. Over the next few weeks, I watched to see if my parents would actually follow through. My mom called me 3 days after the meeting, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. She said the boundaries felt like punishment and that I was being too harsh. She didn't understand why I couldn't just forgive and move on now that we'd talked about it. I felt that familiar guilt rising in my chest but pushed it down. I reminded her that consequences weren't punishment. They were just the natural result of broken trust. I told her I loved her, but I needed to protect myself and my baby. She got quiet and then said she'd try to understand. I had a therapy session the next day and told my therapist about the conversation. She helped me see that my mom's resistance was normal and didn't mean I was doing anything wrong. She explained that people who've never had to respect boundaries often experience them as rejection at first. It would take time for my mom to adjust to this new dynamic. The therapist encouraged me to stay consistent and not back down just because my mom was uncomfortable. 2 weeks after the mediated session, I started attending a prenatal yoga class at a studio across town from where my sister's friends went. Walking into that first class felt like entering a different world. The other women were all at various stages of pregnancy, talking and laughing about normal pregnancy stuff. No drama, no manipulation, just people excited about their babies. I introduced myself and immediately felt welcomed. During the class, I met 3 women who were due around the same time as me. After class, we stood in the parking lot talking about nursery colors and baby name ideas. One woman named Jessica was having trouble deciding between 2 paint colors and pulled up photos on her phone to show us. Another woman named Amber complained about her swollen ankles and we all commiserated. It felt so good to just be a normal pregnant person having normal conversations. We exchanged phone numbers and made plans to meet for coffee the following week. On Sunday, I went to my parents' house for dinner, feeling nervous but wanting to give them a chance to show they could respect boundaries. I walked in and immediately saw my sister sitting at the kitchen table. My stomach dropped. She looked up at me with this expression I couldn't read. My mom started to say something, but I was already turning toward the door. I grabbed my purse and keys without saying a word. My dad came after me and asked me to wait. I turned around and told him we had an agreement. He looked upset but nodded and went back inside. Through the window, I saw him talking to my sister, and then she stood up and grabbed her bag. She left through the front door, shooting me an angry look as she passed my car. My dad came back out and apologized. He said my mom had invited her without telling him, and he should have checked before I arrived. He asked if I would stay now that she was gone. I thought about it for a minute and then agreed. Dinner was tense, but my parents made an effort to follow the rules we'd set. Nobody mentioned my sister or tried to make me feel guilty for leaving when she showed up. My dad asked about my yoga class and seemed genuinely interested when I told him about the women I'd met. Small progress, but it was something. The following Tuesday, 2 police officers showed up at my work asking to speak with me. My heart jumped, but they quickly explained they were just following up on my sister's statement about poisoning the punch at the baby shower. The lab results had come back completely clean, no foreign substances found in any of the samples they tested. They wanted to let me know that making false statements to officers during an emergency response could result in criminal charges. One officer asked if I wanted to press charges against my sister for the false threat. I thought about it, but ultimately said no. I just wanted it documented in case she tried something else in the future. They said they understood and would add it to their report. The whole conversation took maybe 15 minutes but left me shaky for the rest of the afternoon. That week at work, my manager called me into her office to discuss my modified duties and maternity leave plan. She'd gotten approval from HR for me to work from home 2 days a week starting at 30 weeks pregnant. My maternity leave would be 12 weeks, and then we'd reassess my schedule when I returned. She mentioned casually that future promotions might be delayed since I'd be out for several months, and the company needed people who could commit to travel and longer hours. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but at least she was being honest instead of pretending everything would be the same. I thanked her for working with me and left her office feeling grateful I still had a job, even if the career trajectory had shifted. That weekend, my husband and I spent 2 full days working on the nursery. We painted the walls a soft yellow that looked like morning sunlight. My husband assembled the crib while I put together the changing table, both of us reading instructions and occasionally getting frustrated when pieces didn't fit right. We hung curtains with little stars on them and arranged stuffed animals on shelves. By Sunday evening, the room looked like an actual baby would live there soon. Standing in the doorway looking at what we'd created together, I felt this wave of peace. All the family drama faded into background noise for a moment. This was what mattered. This room, this baby, this life we were building. My husband came up behind me and put his arms around my growing belly. Neither of us said anything, just stood there together looking at our daughter's future room. On Monday afternoon, Ricardo stopped by our house carrying 2 large shopping bags. He looked different from the last time I'd seen him, less tense somehow. He explained that he'd bought all these baby gifts months ago, when he still thought his marriage might survive. He couldn't return them and didn't want to keep them as reminders, so he wanted us to have them. Inside the bags were adorable onesies, soft blankets, and a musical mobile with little clouds and stars. We invited him in for coffee, and he told us about starting therapy, and finally grieving the marriage he thought he had. He said his therapist was helping him understand that he'd been enabling my sister's behavior just like my parents had. He talked about learning to set boundaries and prioritize his own mental health. He seemed sad, but also more at peace than I'd ever seen him. Before he left, he hugged me carefully and said he was glad I stood up for myself, even though it blew everything apart. He said sometimes things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt the right way. The weeks passed, and I hit 24 weeks pregnant. The baby started moving regularly, little flutters and kicks that reminded me what actually mattered when family drama tried to pull me back in. During a tense phone call with my mom, I put my hand on my belly and felt a strong kick, which helped me stay calm and stick to my boundaries instead of giving in like I used to. Every time I felt that movement, I remembered I was protecting this little person, not just myself. My dad called one Tuesday evening and sounded different somehow. He told me he'd joined a support group for families dealing with mental illness and personality disorders, meeting every Thursday at a community center downtown. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the change in how he talked about everything. He stopped making excuses and started using phrases about healthy boundaries and not enabling destructive behavior. He said the group taught him that real love sometimes means letting people face the results of their choices instead of protecting them from everything. It was strange hearing him talk this way after years of him telling me to just go along with whatever my sister wanted. My mom tried to apologize during Sunday dinner at their house, but it came out awkward and defensive. She said she knew she could have handled things better, and that she was sorry I got hurt. Then she immediately started explaining why she made the choices she did, and how she was just trying to protect everyone. I felt disappointed because I wanted her to actually take responsibility without the justifications attached. My therapist said later that it was still progress for someone who'd never admitted any fault before, and I should recognize the small step even if it wasn't everything I hoped for. The restraining order hearing happened on a cold morning in late October. My husband and I sat in the courtroom with our lawyer while the judge reviewed all the documentation we'd submitted. The police reports, the threatening statements, the pattern of harassment, everything laid out in black and white. My sister didn't show up to contest it, which her lawyer said meant she was starting to accept some reality about the situation. The judge granted a temporary order for 6 months with options to extend if needed. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt relieved but also sad that it had come to this point with my own sister. At 28 weeks, I had my growth ultrasound to make sure the baby was developing properly despite all the stress. The technician moved the wand across my belly, taking measurements and checking different organs. Everything looked perfect, right on track for size and development. My husband stood next to me watching the screen, and when the technician showed us the baby's face in profile, he started crying. He squeezed my hand and whispered that we were really going to be parents soon. The technician printed extra photos for us, and we stuck them on the fridge when we got home. A week later, my parents called and asked if they could help with baby preparations. My dad said they wanted to buy the crib and changing table as a gift, staying within the boundaries we'd set about respecting our space and decisions. I talked it over with my husband, and we agreed to accept cautiously. It felt like they were trying to rebuild trust through actions instead of just saying sorry, which my therapist had said was important to watch for. We went shopping together on a Saturday, keeping conversation light and focused on baby furniture instead of family drama. They bought a solid wood crib that converted to a toddler bed and a changing table with lots of storage. My sister sent a letter through her therapist in early November. The envelope arrived at our house with her therapist's return address, and I opened it carefully. She asked if we could talk and said she was working on herself in treatment. It sounded more genuine than her previous attempts, but then her therapist called my therapist privately to say my sister still wasn't taking full responsibility and might not be ready for direct contact. I decided to wait, putting the letter in a folder with all the other documentation. My therapist supported this choice, saying I didn't owe my sister access to me just because she'd written a letter. By 32 weeks, I was getting physically uncomfortable in ways that actually helped me focus less on family problems. My back ached constantly. My feet swelled up by evening, and I couldn't sleep more than 2 hours without needing to pee. My husband took over most of the household tasks without me asking, doing laundry and cooking dinner and cleaning the bathroom. He'd rub my feet at night while we watched TV, and I felt grateful to have a partner who just helped instead of keeping score. The physical discomfort made everything else seem less important somehow. Getting through each day took enough energy that I didn't have much left over for worrying about my sister or my parents. My best friend threw me a baby shower in mid-November, keeping it small and carefully planned with just 8 close friends who knew the whole situation. She decorated her living room with simple yellow and gray decorations, served lunch, and organized games that weren't too cheesy. My mom attended and behaved appropriately the entire time, bringing a gift and chatting politely with my friends without trying to take over or make everything about her. She left when the party ended instead of lingering, which felt like another small step toward rebuilding trust. I opened gifts and ate cake and laughed with friends, feeling almost normal for a few hours. At work, colleagues started asking about my plans to return after maternity leave. My manager wanted to know if I'd come back full-time or part-time, and HR needed forms filled out about insurance coverage during my absence. Answering their questions made me realize I might want to look for a different job eventually. The whole promotion situation had left a bitter taste, and I wanted a fresh start somewhere that actually valued work-life balance instead of just talking about it. I started browsing job listings during my lunch breaks, not actively applying yet, but seeing what was out there for after I came back from leave. 2 weeks later, Ricardo called and asked if he could stop by. He showed up at our door looking different somehow, lighter in the shoulders and eyes. He came inside and sat at our kitchen table while I made tea. His separation papers were finalized the week before, and he wanted to tell me in person instead of through text. He looked down at his hands and said he'd actually started seeing someone new, a woman from his support group who knew the whole situation with my sister. She understood what he'd been through and didn't judge him for staying as long as he did. I smiled and told him I was happy he was moving forward with his life. He squeezed my shoulder on his way out and said he hoped my sister would get real help someday, but he couldn't wait around for it anymore. At 36 weeks pregnant, I had my hospital pre-registration appointment on a Tuesday morning. My husband came with me, and we sat in a small office while a nurse went through all the paperwork. I made sure to mention the restraining order against my sister and asked them to put security notes in my file. The nurse nodded and typed something into her computer, then explained that they took these situations seriously and had protocols to protect patient privacy during labor and delivery. She added a flag to my chart that would alert security if anyone tried to get information about me or visit without permission. My husband asked what would happen if my sister showed up anyway, and the nurse said security would escort her off the property immediately. Driving home, I felt a little safer knowing the hospital had a plan. 3 days after that appointment, my dad called sounding tired. My sister had violated the restraining order by sending baby gifts to their house with a note asking them to pass the items along to me. He said they didn't open the boxes or read the full note, just called me right away to report it. I thanked him and then called the police non-emergency line to file a report. An officer came to my parents' house to document the violation and took photos of the unopened packages. The officer called me later and said they'd given my sister an official warning, and the restraining order would be extended automatically because of the violation. Hanging up the phone, I felt sad that it had come to this, but knew it was necessary to protect my family. My mom called the next evening and told me about their support group meeting from that week. She said they'd been working on setting their own boundaries with my sister instead of just asking me to accommodate her. They told my sister they wouldn't discuss me or my pregnancy with her anymore, and wouldn't pass along any messages or gifts. My mom's voice shook when she said it was the first time they'd actually followed through on consequences instead of just talking about them. I told her I was proud of them for taking that step. 3 weeks passed and I hit 39 weeks pregnant. I woke up at 2 in the morning with contractions that felt different from the practice ones I'd been having. My husband timed them for an hour and they were coming every 7 minutes. We grabbed the hospital bag we'd packed 2 weeks earlier and headed to the car. On the drive there, my husband called my parents to let them know I was in labor. My dad answered on the second ring and asked if they could come to the hospital. I took the phone and told them yes, but only after the baby was born and only for a short visit. My dad agreed without arguing and said they'd wait for our call. Labor was long and harder than I expected. The contractions got stronger and closer together as the hours passed. My husband held my hand and brought me ice chips and reminded me to breathe through each wave of pain. The nurses checked on me regularly, and the doctor came in twice to monitor my progress. 14 hours after we arrived at the hospital, I started pushing. 30 minutes later, our daughter arrived screaming and red-faced and absolutely perfect. The nurse placed her on my chest and I looked down at her tiny face. She weighed 7 pounds and 3 ounces. Holding her for the first time, I felt completely certain that every boundary I'd set and every difficult conversation had been worth it to protect her. My husband cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands and then leaned down to kiss both of us. The next day, my parents came to visit after we called them. They arrived exactly when we told them to and brought a small stuffed elephant as a gift. My mom washed her hands 3 times before I let her hold the baby. She sat in the chair by the window and cradled my daughter carefully, tears running down her face. My dad stood next to her and touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. They stayed for exactly 30 minutes like we'd agreed, and didn't try to take extra time or give us advice we didn't ask for. When they left, my mom hugged me and whispered that she was trying to do better. Hospital security never had any incidents with my sister during our stay. The nurses checked my wristband every time they came in the room, and security did rounds past our door regularly. We were discharged after 2 days with a healthy baby and clear instructions for follow-up appointments. Driving home felt strange and surreal, like we were finally starting the life we should have been celebrating all along. My husband drove 10 miles under the speed limit the whole way, while I sat in the back next to the car seat. The first few weeks home were exhausting in all the normal new parent ways. My daughter woke up every 2 hours to eat, and I felt like I was living in a fog of sleeplessness. My husband and I took turns with night feedings and diaper changes, trading off so we could each get a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. My parents offered to bring meals, and they showed up twice a week with containers of soup and casseroles, staying just long enough to drop off the food and peek at the baby without trying to overstay or give advice we didn't want. 6 weeks after the birth, another letter arrived from my sister's treatment program. I opened it carefully and read through 3 pages of handwriting. This time she wrote about the manipulation and control she'd used during my pregnancy and how wrong it had been. She acknowledged that she'd tried to make my joy about her pain and said her therapist was helping her understand why she did that. The letter didn't ask for anything or demand that I respond. Her therapist called my therapist the same week and said my sister was making real progress, but still had significant work to do before direct contact would be healthy for either of us. I started seeing a postpartum therapist when my daughter was 3 weeks old. The first appointment felt strange because I was talking about my sister's breakdown while holding a sleeping baby against my chest. The therapist asked me to explain the whole situation from the beginning, and I spent 40 minutes walking through the fake pregnancy and the months of forced silence and the baby shower explosion. She took notes and nodded, and when I finished, she said something that surprised me. She told me I could feel compassion for my sister's pain without accepting her behavior or putting my family at risk. That separation had never occurred to me before because my parents always treated the two things as connected. Like if I understood my sister's struggles, then I had to tolerate whatever she did. The therapist helped me see that protecting my daughter from unstable behavior was different from punishing my sister for being sick. We worked on this idea over several sessions, and it helped me feel less guilty about the boundaries I'd set. My brother-in-law stopped by when the baby was 5 weeks old. He knocked on the door holding a wrapped gift box and looking nervous like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. I invited him in, and he washed his hands 3 times before I let him hold my daughter. He sat on the couch with her tiny body cradled carefully in his arms and stared down at her face for a long time without saying anything. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were wet. He handed me the gift, which turned out to be a soft yellow blanket with elephants on it. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while the baby slept in her swing, and he told me he was grateful I'd stood up to the family patterns. He said watching me set boundaries had given him permission to do the same thing and leave his marriage. He'd spent years thinking he had to stay and fix everything, but seeing me choose my own family's safety helped him realize he could make that choice too. At my 6-week checkup, the nurse took my blood pressure twice because she wanted to make sure the reading was accurate. It came back normal both times, which felt like a huge relief after months of elevated numbers. My doctor examined me and said everything looked good, and I was cleared for regular activities. She asked how I was managing with the stress of everything that had happened, and I told her about the therapy and the boundaries and how my parents were actually trying. She smiled and said she was impressed with how I'd handled such a difficult situation. Then she asked if she could use my story without my name when teaching medical students about the importance of family boundaries during pregnancy. I said yes because if my mess could help someone else, then at least it served some purpose. I went back to work part-time when my daughter was 10 weeks old. My manager called me into her office on my first day back and I thought I was in trouble for something. Instead, she told me she'd been watching how I balanced everything over the past few months and she was impressed. She said the promotion was already filled, but she wanted me to know there would be other opportunities. It felt better than I expected, even though part of me still felt bitter about what I'd missed. I started interviewing at other companies during my lunch breaks, looking for places with better family leave policies and more flexibility. My parents kept going to their support group every week, even when my sister called them crying and begging them to stop. My dad told me over the phone one night that the group had taught him something important. He said sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices, instead of protecting them from reality. I could hear how hard it was for him to say that out loud. My mom was still struggling more with the boundaries, but she was trying, and that mattered. My sister finished her treatment program in November. Another letter arrived, but this one felt different when I opened it. She wrote 3 pages acknowledging specific things she'd done wrong during my pregnancy. She talked about the manipulation and the control, and how she'd used my joy as a weapon against me. She said she understood why I needed space and she wasn't asking me to forgive her or contact her. She just wanted me to know she was working on herself and taking responsibility. It was the first letter that didn't feel like it had strings attached. I put it in the folder with all the other documents from the past year and told my therapist about it at our next session. She said it sounded like real progress, but reminded me that I didn't owe my sister anything just because she was doing better. I wasn't ready for direct contact and maybe I never would be, and that was okay. We hosted a small Christmas gathering when my daughter was almost 3 months old. My parents came over with my husband's parents and his sister's family. Everyone followed the rules we'd set about staying for only 2 hours and not giving advice we didn't ask for. My mom held the baby and cried a little, but in a happy way this time. My dad played with my husband's nephew and looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. We ate dinner around our small table and nobody brought up my sister or asked when I was going to forgive her. It wasn't the big, loud, chaotic family Christmas I'd grown up with, but it felt peaceful and honest. After everyone left, my husband and I cleaned up together and agreed that this felt more valuable than what we'd lost. Late one night, I was feeding my daughter at 3 in the morning while the house was dark and quiet. She made little sucking noises and her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. I looked down at her peaceful face and felt this wave of gratitude wash over me for all the hard choices that had brought us here. My family wasn't perfect or completely healed, and maybe it never would be. But we had clear boundaries now and honest communication and a foundation built on respect instead of manipulation. My daughter would grow up knowing that love didn't mean accepting bad behavior. She'd see her grandmother and grandfather working on themselves and trying to do better. She'd learn that sometimes protecting yourself and the people you love means making choices that feel hard in the moment, but create safety in the long run. I kissed the top of her head and felt certain that everything I'd been through was worth it to give her this different kind of family.